With yet another twist to the Direct formula, Nintendo kicked off their 2019 Gamescom with the presentation they dubbed Indie World. And I gotta be honest, I'm usually not super excited to play the indie games that come out of these Indie Directs. Not because I don't enjoy indie games, there's way too much variety for that to be the case. That said, that's also the reason why it's hard to gauge the quality of an indie title just by trailers alone. The games that I do walk out of regular Nintendo Directs excited for, they usually come from developers that have a long history of making games that I know that I enjoy. And I don't really know any independent developers on that level yet. I figured I'm not alone in that, and many of you guys also feel the same way that I do. So today, what we're going to do is look at the developers that Nintendo featured in Indie World and see a little bit more on their background, the games they've worked on before, the type of games that they want to make. Let's talk about that. Xbox Game Studios is responsible for what I would say is easily the most hyped game announcement out of this presentation. Ori and the Blind Forest Definitive Edition, and of course they're not the developer, well, they kind of are, but that's not the whole story. Moon Studios is a multinational game developer that was founded in 2010 by co-founders Thomas Mahler, previously a cinematic artist for Blizzard Entertainment on StarCraft 2, Wings of Liberty, and Gennady Korol, who previously worked as the senior graphics engineer for the now defunct animation studio based in Jerusalem called Animation Lab. Like many indie studios, Moon Studios is the product of the team behind it feeling the need to work on games that the companies they worked for weren't willing to make. To circle back to that quick multinational studio bit that I mentioned, a major defining factor of Moon Studios is the way they operate. They aren't officially headquartered anywhere. Their team is spread out across the world and works in what they call a virtual studio, or over the internet as we'd call it. Many of the team members haven't even met in person until E3 2014 for the reveal of Ori and the Blind Forest on Xbox One, but I'm getting ahead of myself here. Moon Studios' first game was a game called War Soup, a fusion of RTS games like StarCraft and FPS games like Halo. War Soup ultimately ended up being silently cancelled in favor of the real major debut, Ori and the Blind Forest, for Xbox 360. This game began development in 2010, initially independently, but in 2011, Microsoft acquired the rights to the game and soon after the studio as a whole. During the development of Ori and the Blind Forest, the team of Moon Studios pulled from a lot of different sources for inspiration, with the gameplay being modeled after current and classic Rayman and Metroid games, the story being inspired by The Lion King, The Iron Giant, and Hayao Miyazaki's Nausicaa of the Forest and the Wind, and the art style drawing from hand-drawn games like the ones that have been developed in the UbiArt engine. Currently, the studio is working on the sequel to this game, Ori and the Will of the Wisp. Will that also come to Switch? Who knows, but I bet it will. For what it's worth, Ori and the Blind Forest has a Metacritic score of 88% and will be launching on the Nintendo Switch eShop on September 27th. The price hasn't been revealed yet, but if I had to guess, I would say $20 like it is listed on the Xbox One marketplace. The Hotline Miami collection was published by Devolver Digital, who, let's be real, has been the best indie publisher on Switch in terms of their quantity of quality releases that you all should play, like Katana Zero, Gato Roboto, and Ape Out, just to name a few. The developers behind the collection, and obviously the games in it, are Dennaton Games, a Swedish indie developer founded by programmer Jonathan Soderstrom and artist Dennis Whedon, whose combined names are the source of the company name. Jonathan, whose name I'm sure I'm mispronouncing, and welcome corrections in the comments, used to develop games in Game Maker Studio as a hobby until the day came where he decided he needed to begin making money from what he was creating. So he teamed up with Dennis to form the studio in 2012 and began development on the original Hotline Miami, which was actually a spiritual successor to a canceled game called Super Carnage that Jonathan made when he was 18 but canned due to programming difficulties. After showing that game's original prototype to Dennis, the duo decided to expand on it, and that became Hotline Miami. The game was inspired by the works of American filmmaker David Lynch for the game's tone, a documentary called Cocaine Cowboys for the game's setting, and the movie Kick-Ass for their use of masks. For the console releases, Abstraction Games ported the game from Game Maker 7 to Fire Engine, a free development software developed by Sony, and later their own proprietary engine, Silverware, for the sequel. The Hotline Miami collection is already available on the Nintendo Switch eShop. Hotline Miami 1 has a Metacritic score of 85, and Hotline Miami 2, Wrong Number, has a Metacritic score of 74. Risk of Rain 2 is being published by Gearbox Publishing, the publishing arm of the studio responsible for the Borderlands series, and developed by Hapu Games, an American indie dev that was founded by two newly graduated Washington University alumni, Duncan Drummond and Paul Morse, in 2012. Their first game that they started to work on during their sophomore year of college was the original Risk of Rain, which was released in 2013. It also came to Nintendo Switch last year. Unlike the third-person shooter we see in the trailer of the sequel in Indie World, that game is a 2D action platformer. That said, the core gameplay loop remains the same, so there's some development details that we can talk about from Risk of Rain that will still apply for the sequel. The inspiration for the original game was pulled from a collection of games they enjoyed playing growing up, with the obvious prevailing source of inspiration being platformers and roguelikes. They called the game Risk of Rain not only because they had SEO in mind and wanted their game to be easy to find online, but also to allude to the concept of a single protagonist in the large game world always worried about a risk of failure or bad things happening. The original idea was to make a tower defense game with difficulty that scaled with how far enemies were from the defense point. They found that players would avoid leaving the defense point, so instead they chose to make difficulty scale with time. Risk of Rain 2 is set to release on the Nintendo Switch eShop this summer. There's no price for this either just yet, but it is listed on Steam Early Access for $20. I'd assume that when it does come to Switch, it'll net out to be no more than $30. Torchlight 2 was developed by Runic Games, with the Switch port in particular being handled by Panic Button, and published by Runic Games' parent company, Perfect World Entertainment, who also published Star Trek Online if you're the type of nerd that likes that sort of thing. Runic, having since been dissolved, was a Seattle-based American game dev founded by Travis Baldry, creator of Fate, a 2005 single-player action RPG for PC and Mac. Max and Eric Schaefer, co-founders of Blizzard North and creators of the Diablo series, and the flagship studio Seattle team, which was largely made up of other former Blizzard North employees, and was also dissolved. As is the trend in this video, their first game was the first installment of the Torchlight franchise, which, unlike the rest of the franchises I mentioned in this video so far, isn't on Nintendo Switch. The development of their first game took place shortly after Flagship Studios closed its doors, so with this game they set out to accomplish what they ultimately couldn't with the canned Mythos project. They lost the rights to the brand, the assets, and the code, so the plan was to start from scratch and create a spiritual successor, but before they could create their dream, an MMO akin to their previous work, they felt it was necessary to introduce their new IP to the world in a single-player game of a similar vein. This approach allowed them to have a short development cycle of about a year. Torchlight's art style was inspired by comic books and classic film animation. The developers have said the inspiration for the game's look can be described as Dragon's Lair meets The Incredibles. Torchlight netted them positive reception from critics and fans alike, but there was one glaring criticism people had. They felt the original should have had multiplayer, so that was the driving force for Torchlight 2. Replicate the experience of the original and make it multiplayer. This also served as being a way to get one step closer to their vision of a Torchlight MMO that they never got to make, cause you know, dissolved. In the case of the Switch version, as I've said, Panic Button is doing the port, and I want to highlight them as well. I think it would be a good idea to take a deeper look at them in a future dedicated video, since they're such a big contributor to the Nintendo Switch ecosystem. You guys know what to do if that's something you would be interested in. Click the like button, let me know in the comments, maybe tweet me on Twitter about it. Torchlight 2 is set to release September 3rd for $20 on the Nintendo Switch eShop. On the platforms it's currently available on, its Metacritic score is 88%. Roki is being published by United Label, who publish a few games you probably never heard of, and it's being developed by Polygon Treehouse, who is not affiliated with that media outlet people on YouTube hate, but instead they are an indie dev based in Cambridge, United Kingdom, and was co-founded by two ex-art directors for the now defunct PlayStation studio Gorilla Cambridge, the team behind the original Medieval games. Tom Jones and Alex, two last names that I don't know how to pronounce, opted to go indie when their last gig ended instead of taking the offers they received from other established studios. Something particularly notable is that this dev has chronicled their whole process, and instead of just distilling it here for you, I'll just point you in their direction. If you're interested in the nuts and bolts of the studio, I'll be sure to leave a link to their blog in the description. As far as their game goes, Roki is a narratively driven adventure game inspired by Scandinavian folklore that they note has non-violent gameplay, accessible controls, and universal themes. Now we're starting to get into the developers that don't really have a whole lot of information that's publicly available, or the information that I found I didn't think was interesting enough to include here. Look, I refuse to make this topic the next 20-minute video, so rapid fire info dump time. Eastward, published by Chucklefish, the publisher behind Stardew Valley and the upcoming Harry Potter simulator Witchbrook, and is being developed by Pixpill, a Chinese indie dev located in Shanghai. There's not a whole lot of information I could find about this team other than the fact that they have 3 employees and that Eastward is their first game. The elevator pitch of the game is it's an adventure game with RPG elements set in a near future post-apocalyptic world. The devs have stated they are aiming for the game to be akin to Zelda with a JRPG storyline and a visual style inspired by 90s anime. Other than that, the only information that we currently have is that the game is releasing on Switch in 2020. Freedom Finger is developed by Wide Right Interactive, an American indie dev based in Los Angeles, California, founded by Jim Dershberger, an Emmy Award nominated director and writer, as well as the creator and executive producer of Sanjay and Craig, an animated TV show on Nickelodeon. James has also produced over 100 short films, commercials, and music videos for clients including Paramount, Vans, Adult Swim, and more. Freedom Finger is the first game to come out of this studio, and it's a music-driven side-scrolling shooter releasing on the Switch eShop this fall. The Tourist is being developed and published by Shin'en Multimedia, a German indie dev with 2 decades of history working almost exclusively with Nintendo, with notable releases like The Art of Balance and Fast RMX. The Tourist is an action-adventure puzzle game that gives me heavy Stardew Valley meets Minecraft vibes. The draw to the game is discovering exotic islands, exploring ancient monuments, climbing into deep mines, and uncovering secret passageways. The Tourist is set to launch on Nintendo Switch in November 2019. Europa was developed and published by Freckle, a developer whose website autoplays audio in the year 2019. So like, I didn't get the best first impression of them while making this video, but I digress. Freckle is an independent game developer that has worked on more than 30 games and completed 200 plus high-profile consulting jobs, according to said website. They've worked for clients including Hasbro, Microsoft, Unity, Discovery Channel, and more. Europa is a puzzle platformer with a strong emphasis on exploration. If I had to sum this game up in a sentence, I would say it looks like what a Mario Odyssey inspired Little Big Planet game would. Earth Knight is being developed by Cleversoft, an American indie dev based in Pennsylvania that was founded in February of 2012. Cleversoft is a team of 12 people, half of which being dedicated employees and the other half being contractors. Earth Knight is their debut game, and to sum it up, it's a hand-illustrated 2D platformer about the dragon apocalypse that was heavily influenced by classic arcade games. The game doesn't have a set release date just yet, but it is slated to release sometime this year, so it can't be too far away. Dungeon Defenders Awakened is being developed by American indie Chromatic Games, which was founded in 2009, originally being called Trendy Entertainment, and is based in Gainesville, Florida. Their first game was actually developed and released within the span of a month and sold over 600,000 copies. This game served as the foundation for what would eventually become Dungeon Defenders Awakened, now with Chromatic Games sporting over 30 employees. The gameplay is a combination of an action RPG and tower defense game for up to 4-player split-screen cooperative gameplay. Dungeon Defenders Awakened launches on Nintendo Switch as a timed console exclusive in February 2020. Scaleboy is being published by Fabraz, another indie publisher that's worked on a few games that you've likely never heard of, and is being developed by Umaiki Games, a German indie team of 4 that's first game was a simulation game about running a bakery. Scaleboy, though, is a pretty hard left turn from that, being an action RPG that's main draw is the ability to swap out your weapons, equipment, and body parts because you play as a resurrected hero from ancient times. Scaleboy is coming to Nintendo Switch on December 3rd. Finally, Easy Day Studios, a team full of skateboarders, is making a lot of Skate4 diehards' dreams come true with the release of Skater XL, a game they describe as the next evolution in skateboarding games. Skater XL's claim to fame is its take on skateboarding controls, taking off from where the Skate series left off, aiming to make them even more true to life than Skate they originally did to compete with the popularity of the Tony Hawk Pro Skater series. Skater XL comes to Nintendo Switch in 2020. Which of these, if any, do you plan on buying? Did learning any of these extra tidbits about the developers featured make you more interested in their games? Let me know in the comments below. Unfortunately, I didn't have time to feature the games Nintendo put in this sizzle reel, but we will be talking about those on our podcast this weekend, Saturday at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. So if that's something you would be interested in checking out, the link's in the description and linked on this end card. If you would be interested in supporting the channel you're on right now, you could just click the like button and share this video with a friend that you think might find it interesting just like you did. If you want to be up to date on the new videos we release, click the subscribe button for new videos every Tuesday and Thursday at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. Okay, that's it for me. See you next week.